Entire cities and empires have simply vanished from the earth. They were not destroyed by armies or conquest, but by something far more silent and powerful. This is the story of how sudden climate shifts erased entire civilizations from history. By the end, you will understand the single greatest vulnerability that every advanced society shares. We will uncover why the mighty Akkadian Empire disintegrated into dust and what forced the Maya to abandon their towering cities. The air we breathe and the weather we expect can become an unstoppable force of collapse. How much do we truly control the world we have built? These climate shifts are not the slow turning of the planet's gears. They are violent jolts, rewriting the rules of survival in a matter of decades. Imagine a world where the rains simply stop coming. A landscape that once fed thousands becomes cracked earth within a single generation. This is the reality of a sudden climate shift, a dramatic and rapid alteration in the very patterns that societies depend on. It is not a slow slide into a new normal, but a catastrophic break from the old one. The foundation of any advanced society rests on a stable food supply and reliable water. When the climate shifts with this terrifying speed, it shatters that foundation completely. Farmers plant seeds that never sprout. Ancient trade routes wither as there is nothing left to carry. This is a threat that moves faster than human ingenuity can respond. To understand how entire civilizations could be wiped from memory, we must first grasp the sheer, overwhelming speed of this force. It is a shock to the system from which there is often no recovery. The stories of the Akkadians and the Maya are not tales of slow decline, but of societies caught in a storm they never saw coming. These silent ruins hold stories written not in stone, but in ice and mud. To uncover the truth behind these disappearances, we turn to the science of paleoclimatology, the art of reading the Earth's ancient diary. Think of scientists as master detectives, but their evidence is not fingerprints or witness statements. Their clues are frozen in time within the deep ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. Every layer of an ice core is a page from a different year, trapping tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere and the fine dust of long-dead volcanoes. Each bubble is a snapshot of the very air a civilization breathed. In the quiet depths of ancient lake beds, another story is written in the mud. Layers of sediment accumulate over centuries, preserving fossilized pollen from forgotten forests and the microscopic shells of tiny organisms. The types of pollen tell us what plants thrived, painting a picture of a lush world or a barren one. The chemistry of those tiny shells reveals the temperature of the water when they were alive. Even the humble tree becomes a historian. The width of each annual ring is a direct record of that year's fortune. A wide ring speaks of abundant rain and easy growth, while a series of painfully narrow rings tells a tale of relentless drought and hunger. By weaving together these different natural archives, researchers can reconstruct the planet's past climate with a precision that feels almost like time travel. They can pinpoint the exact decades when the rains failed for a generation, or when a sudden cold snap gripped the continents. This is the hard evidence that transforms legend into fact. It allows us to take the archaeological proof of a city's abandonment and match it directly to the climatic catastrophe that made it inevitable. The Earth has kept a perfect record of the good years and the very, very bad ones. We have only just learned how to read it. History's first true empire offers a stark warning. The Akkadian Empire emerged in Mesopotamia around 2300 before the Common Era, forging a realm of unprecedented scale and sophistication. Its heart was a landscape of bustling cities and fertile fields, all sustained by brilliant networks of canals and irrigation. Then, within a few generations, it was all gone. At the site of Tel Leilan in modern Syria, archaeologists uncovered not a city destroyed by war, but one that was simply abandoned. The streets were left quiet, the buildings slowly buried by dust. This was not a slow fade, but a historical instant. The culprit behind this sudden erasure has been identified in the most unlikely of places, deep beneath the Gulf of Oman. Sediment cores pulled from the seafloor reveal a dramatic and terrifying change. A sharp, distinct layer shows a massive increase in fine, wind-blown dust that began right as the empire faltered. This dust tells a story of catastrophe, of farmlands turning to barren earth, and of topsoil ripped away by relentless, dry winds. This is the fingerprint of the 4.2 Kiloyear Event, a period of intense global aridity that gripped the region. The Akkadians were master engineers, their canals a marvel of human ingenuity, but their entire system was built on a fundamental assumption that the rains would come and the rivers would flow. When the climate shifted into this brutal, centuries-long drought, their sophisticated networks were rendered utterly useless. You cannot channel water that simply does not exist. The very technology that made their civilization possible became a monument to a world that had vanished. This is our first clear lesson in environmental vulnerability. No amount of human advancement can create rain from a permanently empty sky. The story of the Akkadians proves that even the most powerful empire is a guest in the house of the global climate, a guest that can be asked to leave without warning. Deep within the jungles of Central America, the silence of abandoned stone tells a story of a different kind of collapse. The Maya of the classic period built a civilization of breathtaking intellect, with towering pyramids that pierced the canopy and cities that teemed with life. Yet between the years 800 and 1000 of the Common Era, their great city-states were systematically vacated, their plazas and palaces reclaimed by the roots of the forest. For a long time, this mass exodus was one of history's most stubborn puzzles. The answer was not waiting in a looted tomb or a forgotten codex, but in the cool, perpetual darkness of a cave. Scientists turned to a seemingly humble source, the stalagmites rising from cave floors. These stone pillars grow incrementally, layer by layer, as mineral-rich water drips from the cave ceiling. The chemistry of each layer is exquisitely sensitive to the amount of rainfall above. By analyzing these layers, researchers have read a chronicle of drought written in stone. The data reveals not one single catastrophe, but a devastating sequence of profound dry periods. The rains did not just diminish, they failed repeatedly, with each drought stretching longer and hitting harder than the last. The Maya were brilliant hydrologists, masters of capturing and storing every precious drop. They built immense reservoirs and intricate canal systems, a testament to their understanding of a challenging environment. But their entire society was calibrated to a specific range of climatic variability. The stalagmite records show that the droughts of the 9th century fell far outside that range. They pushed the Maya's sophisticated water management to the absolute brink, and then catastrophically beyond it. You cannot store what never arrives. As reservoirs dried into cracked mud, the crisis spiraled. Competition for the remaining water and fertile land fueled intense warfare among the rival city-states. Inscriptions on monuments shift from tales of cosmic gods and royal births to boasts of conquest and the capture of rival kings. Political alliances shattered, and the social contract that held this complex world together began to fray. While internal conflict amplified the disaster, the primary driver was the unyielding environment. A climate that had once supported a dense, urban population could no longer do so. This is the ultimate lesson of the Maya collapse. It demonstrates with terrifying clarity how environmental stress, applied with enough force and duration, can systematically unravel even the most complex and resilient social fabric. The stones in the cave tell us that the foundation of their world did not crumble. It simply dried up and blew away. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the entire political and economic order of the Eastern Mediterranean shattered. This was the late Bronze Age collapse, a swift and terrifying unraveling that saw mighty empires like the Hittites vanish from history and the great palace fortresses of the Mycenaeans burned to the ground. Even Egypt, a bastion of power for millennia, was pushed to the brink, its authority permanently diminished. For centuries, this event stood as one of history's great mysteries. Who or what could have toppled such a vast and interconnected world? The answer lies not in a single enemy, but in a hidden, relentless pressure that brought everything crashing down. Paleoclimatologists have gathered evidence from ancient lake beds and cave formations that tell a consistent and alarming story. The data reveals a prolonged period of severe drought and significant cooling that gripped the region at the exact moment of the collapse. This was not a minor shift in the weather. It was a climatic hammer blow that fell upon societies built on delicate agricultural foundations. Imagine harvests failing year after year, storehouses emptying, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of famine settling over entire kingdoms. This environmental stress created a cascade of human desperation. As resources vanished, populations began to move in search of survival. It is in this context of widespread societal breakdown that the enigmatic Sea Peoples emerge from the historical fog. Egyptian temple walls depict these mysterious maritime invaders, not as a unified army, but as a collection of displaced peoples attacking from the sea. They were likely both a cause and a symptom of the collapse, a swirling storm of migrants, refugees, and warriors set in motion by the failure of the very land that once sustained them. This is the essence of a perfect storm. The climate shift did not single-handedly destroy these Bronze Age powers. Instead, it acted as the ultimate catalyst, weakening their political cohesion, shattering their economies, and eroding their military strength to a critical point. When other shocks arrived, whether internal rebellion, earthquakes, or the arrival of the Sea Peoples, these civilizations had no resilience left. They were already broken from within by a changing sky and a parched earth. The collapse teaches us that a climate shift is rarely a lone executioner. It is a multiplier of every other vulnerability a society possesses, pushing systems to their breaking point and revealing just how thin the veneer of civilization can be. On the wind-scoured coast of Greenland, the stone foundations of Norse farms stand as silent monuments to a different kind of failure. These Scandinavian settlers carved out two vibrant communities in a land of ice, a testament to incredible human endurance that lasted for nearly 500 years. Then, around the middle of the 15th century, the last voice fell silent. For a long time, the explanation seemed straightforward: a victim of the Little Ice Age, a well-documented period of cooling that gripped the North Atlantic. The story, however, is far more complicated and far more revealing. Ice core data and marine sediment analyses confirm that the climate did indeed turn against them. The weather grew colder and stormier, shortening the already brief growing season and pushing the sea ice that was vital for hunting seals further from their shores. Yet, in this same unforgiving landscape, another people were not just surviving, they were thriving. The Inuit had perfected a way of life in the Arctic. Their technology was exquisitely adapted to the cold, from sleek kayaks for hunting in open water to warm, tailored sealskin clothing and sophisticated techniques for harvesting resources from the sea ice. The Norse saw all of this, lived alongside this expertise for generations, and yet they overwhelmingly refused to learn. Their cultural identity was deeply rooted in their European heritage. They were Christian farmers and pastoralists, and they clung to this identity with a stubbornness that would prove fatal. They continued to raise cattle, a resource-intensive practice that required winter fodder that became impossible to grow. They built massive stone churches in the European style, dedicating immense labor to structures that offered no shelter from the growing cold. Their refusal to adopt the key technologies of the Inuit, like ring seal hunting in the open ocean, left them dangerously malnourished as their traditional food sources failed. Here, the climate shift was not an immediate executioner, but a slow, tightening vice. The real collapse came from a failure of cultural software, an inability to rewrite the rules of their own society when the old rules ceased to work. The Norse in Greenland did not vanish because the world became impossibly harsh. They vanished because, in the face of that harshness, they chose to remain who they were, even as it meant starving in a land where others knew how to live. The silent, sprawling cities of the Indus Valley tell a story of order without emperors. This civilization, contemporary with the pyramids of Egypt, built its greatness not on the backs of slaves and pharaohs, but on a foundation of remarkable urban planning and social cohesion. Its meticulously laid out streets and sophisticated water drainage systems were marvels of the ancient world. Yet, by around 1900 before the Common Era, the heart of this vast culture had stopped beating. The great urban centers like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were not destroyed in a fiery conquest. They were simply and quietly left behind. For decades, the reason for this peaceful disappearance was one of archaeology's most profound mysteries. The answer was not written on any tablet, but was instead hidden in the very soil and the seasonal winds that once gave it life. New scientific evidence points to a dual catastrophe that slowly starved the civilization of its vitality. The first was a dramatic shift in the monsoon patterns. The annual rains, which were the reliable engine of the agricultural cycle, began to fail. Scientists studying ocean sediment cores and ancient cave formations from the region have detected a clear signal of weakening monsoons that set in right around the time of the decline. The life-giving downpours became less frequent and less intense, creating a creeping aridity that would have stressed the farmlands supporting those immense cities. The second blow came from the ground itself, from the rivers that were the civilization's arteries. The mighty Saraswati River, celebrated in later texts, was once a real and powerful flow through the region. Geological surveys and satellite imagery have revealed its ghost, the paleo-channels of a vast river system that once coursed with water. The data suggests that this river and others began to dry up or change their courses dramatically. Some of this was likely due to tectonic shifts, the Earth itself slowly moving and redirecting the water underground and away from the populated plains. This combination of a failing sky and a shifting Earth was a recipe for collapse. You cannot sustain a complex urban society without a massive and reliable food surplus. As the rains dwindled and the rivers turned to dust or wandered away, that surplus evaporated. The grain stores that fed the city dwellers, the artisans, and the administrators would have shrunk year after year. The very reason for these concentrated populations to exist was disappearing. So the people made a logical, if heartbreaking, choice. They did not die in their cities. They simply left. The civilization did not end in a dramatic, single event. It underwent a process of quiet fragmentation. The population likely dispersed into smaller, more mobile village groups, moving to wherever pockets of water and fertile land could still be found. Their sophisticated culture, their writing, and their urban traditions could not be maintained in this new, scattered reality. they adapted to survive, trading the grandeur of the city for the resilience of the village. This is perhaps the most subtle and profound form of collapse, a gradual fading away not from a sudden blow, but from a slow, inexorable withdrawal of the environmental support system. The story of the Indus Valley reminds us that a civilization's end is not always marked by fire and sword. Sometimes it is ushered in by the far quieter, yet equally final, sound of a river falling silent. Drought is the recurring villain in these stories of collapse. It acts as the primary engine of agricultural failure, a force that does far more than just wither crops in a single season. A sustained lack of rainfall begins a slow, insidious poisoning of the land itself. Without water to nourish them, plants die, and the vital organic matter in the soil breaks down and blows away. The very fertility that took centuries to build can be stripped bare in a handful of years. Wells that have provided for generations slowly turn to dust, and great rivers shrink into pathetic, muddy trickles. This is how a climate shift translates into human suffering. The failure of the harvest is only the first and most obvious domino to fall. When the grain stores are empty, famine follows as an inevitable shadow. Hunger breeds desperation, and desperation shatters the social contract. People who once saw themselves as neighbors and countrymen become rivals for a single cup of clean water or a last bag of grain. This social unrest frays the bonds of community and erodes the authority of kings and priests. Why should you pay your taxes or answer the call to labor for a ruler who cannot make the rain fall? Centralized power, the very glue of an empire, dissolves in the face of a universal, unmet need. This vacuum often sparks conflict as groups turn on each other, fighting over the last remaining pockets of fertile land and reliable water. The story is always the same. A society's greatest strength is its ability to feed a large, concentrated population, to create the surplus that allows for artisans, soldiers, and astronomers. But that incredible achievement is also its most profound vulnerability. When the climate turns, that intricate system of agriculture becomes a death trap. The very concentration of people that enabled civilization's glory now accelerates its downfall. There are simply too many mouths to feed from a land that can no longer provide. This is the brutal, recurring lesson written in the dust of every one of these fallen empires. A lack of rain is not the only way a climate can break. Sometimes the cold itself becomes the killer. The Earth has another, more explosive method for triggering a sudden shift, one that begins with fire. Enormous volcanic eruptions can act like a planetary reset button, hurling billions of tons of sulfur dioxide and fine ash high into the stratosphere. Up there, these particles form a lingering, sun-blocking veil that drifts around the globe. This is the genesis of a volcanic winter, a period where the sun dims and average temperatures plummet for years. The effect on agriculture is immediate and catastrophic. Growing seasons vanish, frosts arrive in the middle of summer. Crops that depend on predictable warmth and sunlight simply fail to ripen, leaving fields stunted and barren. We can see the shadow of this phenomenon falling across one of the ancient world's most dazzling cultures. The Minoans of Crete built elaborate palace complexes and a thriving maritime empire, a civilization that seemed to possess a magical vitality. Then, around the year 1600 before the Common Era, their influence abruptly waned. The catalyst is widely believed to have been the colossal eruption of the Thera volcano. The explosion itself would have been a local nightmare of tsunamis and ash falls, but the real civilization-ending damage was likely done by the volcanic winter that followed. A shroud of atmospheric dust would have blotted out the sun, leading to years of cold and failed harvests across the entire eastern Mediterranean. The Minoan economy, built on trade and agriculture, could not withstand such a blow. Their society fractured, creating a power vacuum that their rivals, the Mycenaeans, were all too ready to fill. Centuries later, history provided an even starker example. In the year 536 of the Common Era, a mysterious, dry fog descended across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Ancient historians from Constantinople to China recorded the sun fading to a pale, weak disk, unable to cast proper shadows even at midday. Summer snow fell in China. Temperatures dropped enough to trigger widespread crop failure and famine from Ireland to Mesopotamia. Tree ring data from that period shows some of the most severe stunting in the last 2,000 years, a silent scream of global distress. The cause is now strongly linked to a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or North America, that injected its aerosols directly into the stratosphere. The resulting cold snap was not a local event. It was a worldwide climate shock that stressed societies from the Byzantine Empire to the dynasties of China. This is the other face of a sudden climate shift. It is a reminder that the threat is not always a slow, relentless drying. It can also be a deep, unexpected freeze that arrives in the wake of a planetary fever. Our food supply, the foundation of everything we build, is exquisitely sensitive to a very narrow band of temperature. When the Earth itself decides to adjust the thermostat with volcanic force, it demonstrates a terrifying truth that our greatest vulnerabilities can be hidden not in the empty sky above, but in the restless ground beneath our feet. This pattern of collapse raises a crucial question. Why did some societies shatter under the pressure of a changing climate, while others found a way to endure? The difference often came down to a single, vital quality: societal resilience. Think of resilience as a society's immune system, its ability to withstand a shock and recover. Civilizations that possessed diverse food sources were far less vulnerable than those relying on a single staple crop. If drought killed the wheat, they could turn to fish or hardy livestock or different grains grown in another region. Flexible trade networks were another lifeline. When one route was blocked by drought or conflict, resilient societies could pivot, establishing new partnerships and finding new sources for essential goods. Perhaps most importantly, decentralized political power offered a critical advantage. In a vast top-down empire, a single failed harvest could trigger a system-wide collapse as the central authority struggled to distribute aid across a starving realm. But in a society of smaller, more self-sufficient communities, one region could fail while others survived, allowing knowledge and people to move and adapt. Consider the stark contrast between ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Egypt's civilization was anchored by the Nile, whose annual floods were remarkably predictable, a reliable heartbeat that sustained the kingdom for millennia. Mesopotamia, however, was utterly dependent on unpredictable rainfall and intricate irrigation. When the rains failed for generations during the 4.2 Kiloyear Event, the Akkadian Empire had no backup plan. Its complex, centralized system became its prison. Meanwhile, Egypt, with its resilient river-based agriculture, often weathered the same global droughts with far greater stability. Societies that could physically migrate, like the dispersed villages of the Indus Valley, or those that could rapidly innovate new technologies, stood a fighting chance. The Norse in Greenland represent a tragic failure of this principle. They had the example of the adaptable Inuit right beside them, yet their rigid cultural identity prevented them from learning. Their story is a warning that the most advanced technology is useless if a society's mindset is brittle. The ultimate lesson written in this ancient dust is not about the power of the climate, but about the fragility of human systems. A civilization's structure and its capacity for change are the critical determinants of its fate when the world turns hostile. This is a profound lesson in the non-negotiable value of adaptability. Our own global civilization, for all its technological marvels, is now putting this same principle to the ultimate test. The ruins themselves hold the final testimony, etched not in grand monuments but in the silent, desperate traces of everyday life. When archaeologists carefully peel back the layers of time at these abandoned sites, they are not just uncovering old buildings, they are reading a story of societal distress written in stone, bone, and soil. One of the most poignant signs is the sudden, frantic construction of fortification walls. At sites once open and confident, we find evidence of walls being thrown up in a hurry, using rough, scavenged materials. These are not the planned defenses of a kingdom at war, but the panicked reactions of a people feeling a deep, existential threat closing in. They are building walls not against a foreign army, but against their own neighbors, against the chaos born from scarcity. The very earth tells a parallel story. In sediment cores taken near these ancient cities, a distinct layer often appears, a thick band of coarse silt and sand that was not there before. This is the signature of rapid, large-scale erosion. It is what happens when the protective cover of trees and grasses dies off from drought, when the topsoil, no longer held by roots, is simply washed away by the next rain or carried off by the relentless wind. The land itself was bleeding and the civilization was losing its skin. Inside the cities, the evidence becomes heartbreakingly personal. Large communal grain silos, once the pride and security of a city, are found completely empty or filled only with the dust of decay. There is no surplus left, and the human remains from this final period speak a silent, brutal language. Skeletons show the distinctive marks of chronic malnutrition, like lines of arrested growth in the teeth and bones, and a surge in skeletal injuries from blunt force trauma. This points to a society where hunger was constant and violence had become a common currency for survival. Perhaps the most telling clue of all is not found in a single object, but in a pattern of movement. Archaeologists see a clear trend of ruralization. The grand urban centers, those engines of culture and power, are gradually abandoned. Meanwhile, the archaeological record in the surrounding countryside shows a sudden blossoming of small, simple villages. People were voting with their feet. They were leaving the complex, resource-hungry life of the city behind, fragmenting back into smaller, more mobile, and ultimately more resilient communities. They were returning to a way of life that demanded less from a land that could no longer give. When this physical evidence from the ruins is laid side by side with the paleoclimatic data from ice cores and stalagmites, the correlation is undeniable. The story locks into place, the scientific data shows the climate shifting, and the archaeological record shows a society fracturing under the exact same pressure. This is how we know the ruins are the crime scene and the climate is the prime suspect, caught by a perfect fingerprint of dust, bone, and abandoned stone. The true power of a climate shock lies not in the initial blow, but in the cascade of failures it triggers. Think of a civilization as a complex, interlocking machine. A sudden, prolonged drought is like throwing a single piece of grit into its most delicate gears. The first consequence is agricultural collapse, the failure of the harvest. But that single failure immediately begins to multiply. When grain becomes desperately scarce, its price skyrockets. This is where the social fabric begins to tear. The wealthy elite can still afford to buy food, hoarding what little remains. But for the common farmer, the artisan, the laborer, the situation becomes impossible. A profound and brutal inequality emerges not from ideology but from sheer, desperate survival. The social contract, the unspoken agreement that binds a people to their leaders, shatters. Why should you remain loyal to a king or a priest who stands by while your children starve? the ruling class loses its divine mandate, its legitimacy evaporating in the heat of a barren field. This loss of faith creates a dangerous power vacuum. With central authority weakened, internal strife becomes inevitable. Regions turn against one another, fighting over the last fertile valley. Factions within the ruling class may struggle for control, their political squabbles now taking place against a backdrop of widespread hunger and social unrest. This internal chaos is the critical moment of vulnerability. A civilization that is tearing itself apart from the inside has no strength left to guard its borders. It cannot muster a coordinated army. It cannot maintain the intricate roads and canals that are its lifeblood, and it has nothing to offer its citizens in return for their loyalty. This is when external threats, which might have been manageable in prosperous times, become existential. A rival kingdom sees an opportunity for conquest. Nomadic groups, perhaps also pushed by the same climatic pressures, see a weakened neighbor and move in to claim its resources. The initial climate shift did not raise the army that stormed the gates. It simply broke the locks and left the gates wide open. This domino effect reveals the profound interconnection between environmental and human systems. The climate shock attacks a civilization's weakest points, whether they are social, political, or economic. It exposes every flaw and amplifies every tension. A society that seemed stable and powerful in times of plenty can be revealed as incredibly fragile when the rains stop. The collapse is never about just one thing. It is about how one broken link puts strain on the next until the entire chain snaps. These ancient stories might be more than just legends. Woven into the fabric of countless cultures are eerily similar tales of a great, world-covering flood. From the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah's Ark, the narrative is hauntingly consistent, a divine punishment meted out through water, with a chosen few surviving to repopulate the earth. For a long time, these were dismissed as purely symbolic fables, but what if they are a form of deep history, a cultural memory of a real and terrifying event? Paleoclimatologists have identified a prime suspect, the catastrophic meltwater pulses at the end of the last ice age. As the vast continental glaciers retreated, they released enormous volumes of water back into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise at a rate that would have been terrifying to witness. Coastlines did not just slowly inch inland, they were swallowed. Vast, fertile plains that were home to early human settlements, like the Doggerland region that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, disappeared beneath the waves within generations. For the people living there, it would not have been a slow change, but a relentless, unstoppable invasion of the sea, an event so traumatic it could easily have been remembered as the gods drowning the world. The flood myths could be the poetic, lasting echo of this global coastal catastrophe. The same pattern applies to stories of a lost golden age. Many traditions speak of a time of perfect harmony and abundance, a paradise that was later lost. This could be a folk memory of the Holocene climatic optimum, a period several thousand years ago when global climates were generally warmer and wetter. Lush savannas stretched across what are now deserts, and life was, for a time, genuinely easier for many early farming societies. The subsequent shift to a drier, more variable climate would have felt like a fall from grace, a punishment for some unknown sin that stripped away the former bounty. The myth becomes a way to explain a harsh new reality, a story to make sense of why the world became so much more difficult. These narratives are not literal history books, but they serve a vital function. They are a way for a culture to process and transmit a core truth about a traumatic encounter with a changing planet. The specific details of a boat or a chest of seeds are the symbols, but the underlying message is one of profound environmental disruption. They tell us that our ancestors lived through periods of sudden, terrifying change, and they encoded those survival warnings into the most durable material they had: story. These myths are a testament to the long relationship between humanity and a dynamic climate, reminding us that the struggle for stability against a volatile world is one of the oldest stories we have. These ancient ruins hold a chilling message for our modern world. The same forces that erased entire civilizations from history are now at our doorstep, but this time we are the ones pulling the triggers. Our relentless emission of greenhouse gases is engineering a planetary-scale climate shift with a speed that may even eclipse the droughts of the Akkadians or the volcanic winters of the past. The threats we face are hauntingly familiar: rising seas that threaten our coastal cities, extreme weather events that shatter our infrastructure, and creeping desertification that turns fertile land to dust. We have built a global civilization of staggering complexity and technological prowess, a network more intricate than anything the Bronze Age world could have dreamed of. Yet the fundamental lesson from the dust of Tel Leilan and the silent pyramids of the Maya is that no amount of human advancement can repeal the laws of nature. Our sophisticated systems are just as vulnerable to a broken climate as their irrigation canals were to a vanished river. The critical difference between us and them is not our power, but our awareness. We can read the warning in the ice cores and the tree rings. We can see the pattern unfolding in real time. This knowledge imposes a profound responsibility. The past screams the necessity for sustainable practices that work with the planet's cycles, not against them. It demands resilient infrastructure that can bend without breaking under the stress of new weather extremes. Most of all, it underscores the non-negotiable need for global cooperation, because a climate crisis recognizes no borders. The fall of the Akkadian Empire shows us that a centralized system can fail catastrophically when its single environmental support collapses. Our own globally interconnected world faces a similar systemic risk. The choice before us is not whether to change, but how. We can cling to outdated systems and brittle ideologies, much like the Norse in Greenland, and risk a similar fate. Or we can learn from the ultimate survivalists, the ones who adapted and dispersed, and build a society that is agile, resilient, and in balance with the world that sustains it. The stones of these lost cities are not just monuments to what was. They are a mirror showing us a possible future we still have the power to avoid. The stones of Angkor Wat hold the memory of water. This magnificent city, the heart of the vast Khmer Empire, was a masterpiece of hydrological ambition. Its grandeur was not built on dry land alone, but on a sprawling, intricate network of canals, moats, and immense reservoirs known as barrays. These structures were the empire's circulatory system, designed to capture the lifeblood of the annual monsoon, storing its abundance to see the population through the dry months. This was engineering on a staggering scale, a testament to human confidence in taming the natural world. But the very sophistication of this system became its greatest liability when the climate itself began to rebel. Scientists have turned to a silent witness, the region's ancient trees. By analyzing the width of tree rings, they have reconstructed a haunting chronicle of the 14th and 15th centuries. The story these rings tell is not one of a simple, steady drying. Instead, they reveal a terrifying roller coaster of weather extremes. There were periods of prolonged and punishing drought when the rains simply refused to come, leaving the vast reservoirs to shrink under a blistering sun. These parched years were then violently interrupted by episodes of supercharged monsoon deluges, downpours of such ferocity that they would have overwhelmed the very canals designed to contain them. This was the double blow that shattered the Khmer's world. The drought starved the system of water, while the catastrophic floods tore through the infrastructure with unstoppable force, scouring out canals and clogging them with silt and debris. You cannot manage what you cannot predict. The Khmer engineers had calibrated their entire civilization to a predictable rhythm of monsoon and dry season. When that rhythm dissolved into chaotic, violent swings, their brilliant technology was rendered obsolete. The system was built for a specific range of variability, and the new climate fell completely outside that range. The empire's slow decline was not a failure of imagination or effort. It was a defeat by volatility. The reservoirs that once symbolized their control over nature became monuments to a climate that had slipped its leash, a powerful reminder that our most ambitious engineering projects are only as strong as the stable climate patterns they are built upon. A civilization starved of trade is a civilization starved of options. In our modern world, we take for granted the intricate web of global supply chains that bring us everything from food to fuel. The ancient world was no different, just slower. Empires were bound together by a fragile lattice of trade routes, carrying not just luxury goods, but the absolute essentials for survival and power. A sudden climate shift did not just destroy harvests locally, it could snap these vital lines of communication and commerce, plunging entire regions into a shared darkness. When a breadbasket like Mesopotamia was gripped by generations of drought, its fields produced no surplus grain for export, but the damage did not stop at its borders. That failure rippled outward. Suddenly, a distant kingdom that relied on imported Mesopotamian grain to feed its own cities found its storehouses empty. This was only the beginning of the cascade. The same drought would have crippled the ability to produce other key exports, like textiles or crafted goods, which were used to barter for critical raw materials. Think of bronze, the alloy that defined the era, used for everything from plows to swords. Making bronze requires copper and tin, metals that were almost never found in the same place. Copper might come from Cyprus, while tin was sourced from as far away as Afghanistan. This meant a continuous, long-distance exchange was the only thing keeping the Bronze Age world armed and functional. If a climate disaster struck a hub like the Hittite Empire, the flow of these materials would be severed. A kingdom might have plenty of copper, but without tin from a drought-stricken partner, its smiths could no longer produce bronze. Its farmers would be left with broken tools and its soldiers with useless weapons. The entire foundation of its economy and defense would crumble, not from a direct environmental blow, but from a broken link in a chain 1,000 miles long. This is the terrifying power of interdependence. The late Bronze Age collapse stands as the ultimate example of this domino effect. A climate-triggered crisis in Anatolia or the Levant did not remain a local tragedy. It reverberated through that entire interconnected system, snapping the economic threads that bound Greece to Egypt and the Hittites to Mesopotamia. A drought in one region could bankrupt a kingdom in another, not through invasion but through silent economic strangulation. The climate shock acted like a single snipped wire in a vast network, causing a system-wide blackout. This transforms a regional problem into a systemic one, proving that the very connections that make a civilization advanced and powerful also make it profoundly vulnerable. When the environment turns hostile, it does not just attack our fields, it attacks our partnerships, our supply lines, and our shared safety net, leaving everyone isolated and infinitely weaker. But here is where we must be careful historians, not just storytellers. It is dangerously easy to replace an old mystery with a new, overly simplistic answer, to fall into the trap of climate determinism. The truth is far more complex and far more revealing. Not every drought leads to collapse, and not every collapse was caused by a drought. To see climate as a lone executioner is to miss the entire point. The real story is one of interaction, of a society's internal weaknesses being ruthlessly exposed by an external shock. Think of it this way: a healthy person with a strong immune system might catch a cold and recover quickly. But that same cold, introduced into a body already weakened by other ailments, can become a life-threatening crisis. Climate shifts are the cold, and a civilization's political strife, its resource mismanagement, and its social inequalities are the pre-existing conditions. The scientific method helps us separate causation from mere coincidence. We look for a precise and undeniable alignment. When a stalagmite in a cave records a 50-year mega drought, and the archaeological layer from that exact same 50 years shows a city's grain silos empty, its defensive walls hastily built, and its population plummeting, we are not looking at a coincidence. We are looking at a cause and effect relationship. This nuanced view does not let human failing off the hook. In fact, it holds up a stark mirror. It forces us to ask why some societies shattered under the pressure while others endured. The difference was rarely the severity of the drought itself, but the brittleness of the society it struck. A civilization already straining under the weight of corruption, endless warfare, or reckless deforestation had no resilience left when the rains finally failed. Climate was the spark, but the kindling was already in place. This is the powerful, sobering lesson we must take from these ruins. It shifts the question from what happened to them to what makes any of us vulnerable. A single ice core from Greenland is a frozen library of the Earth's past. Each delicate layer is a page from a different year, preserving not just the snow that fell, but the very air that surrounded it. Scientists analyze the subtle chemistry of the ice, measuring specific forms of oxygen atoms called isotopes. The ratio of these isotopes is a direct thermometer for the past, telling us precisely how cold or warm the planet was in a given year. And trapped within that ice are tiny, perfect bubbles of ancient atmosphere, time capsules of the air that the Akkadians or the Maya breathed, allowing us to measure ancient levels of carbon dioxide and methane. This is not guesswork, it is a high-fidelity recording of planetary history. On the dark ocean floor, another natural archive is continuously being written. Sediment cores pulled from the seabed are built from the slow, steady rain of microscopic life and dust. They contain the skeletons of tiny creatures called foraminifera. These minuscule organisms, no bigger than a grain of sand, absorb different forms of oxygen from the seawater as they build their shells. The precise chemistry of those shells is locked in at the time of their death, preserving a permanent record of the ocean's temperature when they were alive. By reading these layered deposits, scientists can reconstruct the temperature of the seas for thousands of years. Together, these icy and muddy records allow us to build a stunningly precise timeline of the Earth's climatic past. We can pinpoint the exact decade when a terrible drought began to grip Mesopotamia, and then match that date to the archaeological layer in Tel Leilan where the city was abandoned. We can see the slow, relentless weakening of the monsoon in the ocean sediments near India, and then trace its devastating impact on the granaries of the Indus Valley. This is the incontrovertible evidence that transforms legend into fact. These silent witnesses provide the hard data that confirms a climate event was not just a local story, but a global phenomenon, and they directly link those specific, violent shifts in the planet's health to the moment a civilization's heartbeat began to falter. The silence of these ruins can be misleading. When we say a civilization collapsed, we often picture a final, dramatic end, a last citizen closing the gate behind them. But the people themselves rarely simply vanished into thin air. They had to go somewhere. Archaeological evidence paints a far more nuanced and human picture. one not of extinction but of dispersal. The grand plaza of a Maya city, once bustling with thousands, did not empty into a mass grave. The meticulous streets of an Indus Valley metropolis were not the setting for a final stand. Instead, the evidence points to a great unraveling, a societal simplification. The citizens of these great urban centers made a logical, if difficult, choice. They voted with their feet. For the Maya, this likely meant a migration back to the countryside, a return to smaller, scattered villages in regions where water could still be found. They traded the grandeur of the stone city for the resilience of the forest village. In the Indus Valley, the highly centralized urban culture fragmented. The people probably broke into smaller, nomadic groups, becoming more mobile to follow the shifting pockets of water and fertile land that their great, static cities could no longer access. This was a strategic retreat from complexity. The intricate social hierarchies, the specialized professions, the vast infrastructure of temples and administration, all of it required a massive food surplus that the changing climate had stolen away. When that surplus vanished, the very reason for such concentrated populations disappeared with it. So, the civilization did not end so much as it transformed. Its people adapted, shedding the layers of complexity that had become a liability and returning to a more sustainable, decentralized way of life. The end of their world was not a death, but a dramatic downsizing, a survival strategy written in the quiet movement of people away from centers of power and back to the land. Human ingenuity has always been our first line of defense against a hostile world. When the climate began to shift, ancient engineers did not simply surrender, they fought back with brilliant, desperate creativity. In the rose-red city of Petra, the Nabateans performed what seemed like magic in the desert. They carved intricate networks of channels and dams directly into the sheer cliff faces, designed to capture every possible drop of water from brief, violent flash floods. Their system of terracotta pipes and reservoirs turned a barren landscape into a thriving hub of civilization. 1,000 years later and a world away, the ancestral Pueblones, sometimes called the Anasazi, faced a similar existential threat in the American Southwest. They responded with equal brilliance, constructing elaborate grids of check dams and gravel mulches to slow runoff and preserve soil moisture, and carving spiral grooves into the bedrock to channel precious rainwater directly to the roots of their crops. These were not the acts of a people in decline, but of societies at the peak of their adaptive powers. Yet, in both cases, their magnificent cities now stand empty. This presents us with a profound and unsettling paradox. Why did such advanced technological solutions ultimately fail? The answer lies in the critical difference between managing a crisis and surviving a catastrophe. Their systems were engineered for a known range of variability, for the worst drought in living memory. They could stretch a 2-year drought into 4, or conserve enough water to survive a slight reduction in annual rainfall. But they could not create water from nothing. When the climate shift was not a fluctuation but a fundamental, long-term alteration, when a decade-long drought became a 50-year mega-drought, the very foundation of their design crumbled. The Nabatean channels, so perfect for capturing sporadic downpours, were left staring at a perpetually empty sky. The check dams of the ancestral Pueblones could not hold back the dust of a landscape that was turning to desert for good. Technology, for all its power, exists within the boundaries of the natural world. It can optimize a system, but it cannot redefine the rules of that system when the rules themselves are rewritten by the planet. This is the sobering limit of innovation alone. It is a tool for resilience, not a substitute for it. When the environment changes so drastically that it invalidates the core assumptions of your society, even the most ingenious engineering becomes a beautiful, complicated relic. The true danger lies in the velocity of the transformation. A civilization can weather almost any change if it arrives slowly enough. A gradual cooling over 1,000 years is a problem to be solved across countless generations, allowing for the slow migration of populations, the careful domestication of new drought-resistant crops, and the subtle evolution of social structures. But when the climate lurches within the span of a single human lifetime, the very mechanisms of adaptation break down. A farmer who plants his fields using the wisdom passed down from his grandfather is suddenly following a recipe for famine. The intricate canal system, a marvel of engineering that took 50 years to build, becomes a useless sculpture in a landscape that no longer has any water to give it. The entire society is trapped. It is locked into its physical infrastructure, its agricultural practices, and its cultural worldview, all of which are suddenly, violently wrong. This is the core difference between a manageable challenge and an existential catastrophe. The speed of the shift is what shatters the system. There is no time to invent new technologies from scratch. There is no time to negotiate new political alliances or reforge the social contract when people are already fighting over the last well. The rapidity transforms a civilization's greatest strengths, its permanence and its complexity, into fatal liabilities. This historical lesson lands with terrifying force in our own time. The climate change we are now engineering is not a slow geological process, it is a sprint. And our globally interconnected civilization, for all its power, is still running on the assumptions of a stable, forgiving world that no longer exists. A sobering pattern emerges from the dust of every fallen empire we have explored. The very architecture of a complex civilization, with its towering cities and intricate hierarchies, contains a hidden flaw. To sustain its concentrated populations and specialized classes of artisans, soldiers, and priests, it requires a colossal and uninterrupted surplus of food. This surplus is managed by a delicate web of administration, a system of tax collectors, scribes, and governors who coordinate the planting, harvesting, and distribution of grain. It is a magnificent humming machine of human cooperation, but this machine is exquisitely sensitive. A sudden climate shift does not merely reduce the harvest, it throws a wrench directly into the machine's most vital gears. When the rains stop for a generation, the entire system of distribution seizes up, the surplus vanishes, and the administrators have nothing left to administer. The social contract, the agreement that binds the farmer to the city dweller, shatters. Why should a farmer send his last bag of grain to a king who lives in a distant stone palace, a king who cannot make the rain fall? This is the moment when complexity becomes a cage. A decentralized society of small villages possesses a profound resilience. If one village well runs dry, its people can simply move to the next valley, adapting and dispersing with the flexibility that saved the people of the Indus Valley. But a vast, urbanized empire cannot simply pick up and move its monumental capital. It is anchored in place by its own grandeur, trapped by the very infrastructure that once made it great. The intricate systems of power and supply are not just broken, they are too complicated to repair quickly. How do you restart a bureaucracy when there is no food to pay the bureaucrats? How do you coordinate a recovery when the messengers are starving and the roads are lined with the desperate? This is the cruel paradox of civilization. The traits that enable its rise, its scale, and its specialization are the same traits that can make its collapse so absolute. Our modern world represents the ultimate expression of this complexity. Our global supply chains and digital networks are wonders of human achievement, but they are also systems of breathtaking interdependency. A climate shock in one of our planet's breadbaskets would not just cause a local famine, it would ripple through financial markets, disrupt energy supplies, and strain political alliances in ways that echo the Bronze Age collapse on a planetary scale. We have built a civilization of unprecedented power, yet we may share the exact same vulnerability as the Akkadians, a fragility written into the blueprint of complexity itself. A weakened body is an open door to plague. When the climate turned against a civilization, hunger was often just the first chapter of a much darker story. Malnutrition from failed harvests does more than just cause starvation. It systematically dismantles the body's natural defenses. A population weakened by years of poor diet is a tinderbox waiting for a single spark of disease. This is the brutal synergy between a broken environment and a raging pandemic. The social chaos triggered by famine accelerates the spread of pathogens. Desperate people migrate in search of food, carrying sickness with them along ancient trade routes and into crowded, unsanitary refugee camps. The very movements of survival become a vector for death. The collapse of public order means that basic sanitation and medical care, however rudimentary, vanish. Water sources become contaminated, and waste piles up in the streets of once great cities. A society that cannot feed itself has no hope of fighting a fever, but the climate's role in disease goes even deeper than creating a vulnerable host. It can actively reshape the map of illness itself. Subtle shifts in temperature and rainfall can transform entire ecosystems, creating new breeding grounds for the agents of death. A period of unusual warmth and standing water, for instance, can allow malaria-carrying mosquitoes to thrive in regions where they were once rare. A series of wetter years might cause rodent populations to explode, setting the stage for outbreaks of plague. These pathogens and their carriers are always present in the background, held in check by stable climatic boundaries. When those boundaries are redrawn by a sudden shift, the diseases are unleashed upon populations with no prior immunity, a biological shock on top of an environmental one. While direct evidence of ancient plagues is notoriously difficult to find in the archaeological record, the grim clues are there. Mass graves without signs of violence, settlements abandoned with the pottery of daily life still in place, and a sudden, dramatic drop in population. Estimates all point to an invisible reaper walking among the starving. It is likely that the final collapse of mighty empires like the Hittites or the profound weakening of late Bronze Age Egypt was not due to drought or invasion alone, but to a final, devastating wave of sickness that swept through their malnourished and displaced populations. The climate shift creates the crisis, and then disease delivers the final, merciful blow. This transforms our understanding of these historical collapses from a single cause event into a tragic cascade, where one disaster actively cultivates the next. The environment does not just starve a civilization, it sickens it, proving that the true cost of a changing world is measured in a compound misery that attacks a society from every possible angle. These whispers from the ruins carry a warning that transcends time itself. The crumbling stones of the Akkadian Empire, the silent pyramids of the Maya, and the wind-scoured foundations of the Norse are not just relics. They are prophecies etched into the very earth, telling a story that is urgently relevant to us today. Their message is brutally simple: no civilization, no matter how powerful or technologically advanced, is exempt from the laws of the natural world. Our modern global society, with its sprawling cities and digital networks, operates on the same fundamental principle as every empire that came before it. We are utterly dependent on a stable climate for our food, our water, and our security. The past shows us that the greatest threat is not the climate shift itself, but the brittleness of our own systems in the face of it. The ultimate lesson is one of humility. Survival has never been about conquering nature. It has always been about recognizing our place within its delicate balance and building societies that are flexible, resilient, and wise enough to change course when the world changes around us. Let these lost worlds be our most profound teachers. They remind us that the most critical wisdom for our future is often buried in the quiet dust of our past.